Welcome to the Italian Wine Podcast. This episode has been brought to you by the Wine to Wine Business Forum 2022. This year will mark the 9th edition of the forum to be held on November 7th and 8th of 2022 in Verona, Italy. This year will be an exclusively in-person edition. The main theme of the event will be all-round wine communication. Tickets are on sale now, so for more information, please visit us at winetowine.net.
Thanks for tuning in to Get U.S. Market Ready with Italian Wine People on the Italian Wine Podcast. I'm Steve Raye, your host, and this podcast features interviews with the people actually making a difference in the Italian wine market in America, their experiences, challenges, and personal stories. And I'll be adding a practical focus to the conversation based on my 30 years in the business. So if you're interested in not just learning how, but also how else, then this pod is for you. Hello, and welcome to this week's edition of Get U.S. Market Ready with Italian Wine People. I'm Steve Raye, your host, and my guest this week is Robin Shay. Robin, what's your title at Allegrini?
Export manager. Has been the same for the last 15 years, too.
But it seems like you do so much more. So the way I would ask the question is, how does a California kid end up living in Napa and working for an Italian winery and speaking 5 languages? Can you tell me that in 60 seconds?
Very simply, my mother's British. And so she looked at my college list of universities I was interested in applying to and realized that there was a very similar overlay to the Playboy Party Report and said...
Party schools of the Big Ten, right? Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, you may want to think about not going into debt for that particular objective. And I had a passport at the time, and the European Union, which I consider just a fantastic project and one that I really hope stays alive, at that time was coming together. I ended up getting a degree from the University of Madrid, and there was a program called the Erasmus program, which was fantastic to encourage cultural kind of interchange in between the countries of the EU. I was able to take advantage of that. I ended up living in Europe 11 years. I have a degree from a Spanish university. I lived in Spain for 4 years. I lived in Portugal for 2. I lived in Italy for 7. And during that time, I was, from the Napa Valley, so I kind of would fall back on summer gigs that had to do with, making wine in the Douro Valley or harvesting in Bordeaux or making wine in southern Italy. And eventually, I fell in love with Italy and the culture, and I have stayed close to what kind of keeps me energized.
I find that, in Napa, everybody's head is all about California, the Sierra Gap and all that kind of stuff. And your Italian wine, is there a disconnect there, or am I misreading something?
It was, I'll tell you the story. I was making wine in southern Italy, and I was really, and to give you an idea, California wine, there's a lot about making of wine, the technical terroir. And I really appreciate that because here it's a new world. It's an area of discovery. So you can talk for a very long time about philosophies of oak aging. And when I tried to do that in Italy, I remember the guy I was working for said, Robin, I hope you're a Californian guy just wants to talk about the oak in the wine. He said, here in Italy, wine is to help us talk about, poetry and culture and cuisine and history. And at the very end of a meal, after we've touched all the subjects and had a good time, it's only at that point when the bottle's finished that you ask, what was that wine?
I love that story. That is very true.
So, and that was the sort of thing I remember as a kid from California. I mean, the first text I was given when I was still making wine was the Odyssey by Homer. He said, start here, try to wrap your head around really. And I had some great mentors in that regard, probably not professionally speaking so much, but I've had some wonderful mentors from a humanistic standpoint. That's why I still work in Italian wine.
Tell me a little bit about Allegrini and its presence in the U.S. and what it is in Italy and what that means here.
So Allegrini is a 7-generation family endeavor. Rooted in the Valpolicella. So this is Northern Italy, the Veneto, of course. Everything that Allegrini does is estate produced. So they're farmers first and foremost, and they're winemakers after that. And it's been really one of the secrets to their success is controlling quality. They're also innovators. So despite these very deep roots, if you'll pardon the pun, they really look to innovate and kind of have tradition play an important role in terms of a background, but they are the protagonists in the play that they are developing. And like many, Franco Allegrini and his father before him, Giovanni Allegrini, really questioned local viticultural techniques, aging regimen, and clonal selection, along with establishing single vineyards from their own estates. And it kicked off really a cultural quality revolution in the Valpolicella. The estate was the first to use the Guyot production technique, which actually lowers yields per vine and therefore, in theory, concentrates more, or shall I say, brings you higher quality grapes with more flavor. They were the first to implement that in the Valpolicella. And still to this day, Franco Allegrini was someone who spent the last 30 years really kind of putting a polish on Amarone and really questioning some of the accepted traditional techniques in order to make a style of wine which was really reflective of our terroir, and that it's a mineral-driven wine, it's a nervy wine, it's a food wine, which I feel like those are fundamental elements of Italian wine. And sometimes when you think of Amarone, those aren't the things that come into your head. You think, power and sugar and sweet and over the top and oak. But this is not what Allegrini's wines are really about. A lot of that is because of our land, which is high in calcium, and we produce 100% of our grapes from our own land, but also because of this wonderful approach which Allegrini has had with the wines. And right now it's an incredible moment of transition for the estate. We lost Franco Allegrini earlier this year, right after Vinitaly, to cancer, and it was an incredible blow to the family. Today, the estate is, of course, run by Marilisa Allegrini, who has been the entrepreneurial energy and the CEO for the last 30 plus years, and Franco's sons, who have now moved in to fill his very large shoes. One really dedicating himself to production. That's Giovanni, the other to viticulture, Matteo, and then Francesco, who's filling out his administrative and business presence at the estate.
So there's been the growth has not happened in the Valpolicella area. They bought estates in Tuscany and in Montalcino in particular. Why the expansion there, which is so very different than Verona or Valpolicella?
So we've had wonderful success with Allegrini brand in the U.S. and there has been a growth trajectory, but we've kind of got to a bursting point in the sense that estate production has its limitations. And what the family decided to do in order to be able to continue this successful business model of estate produced wines that really had a signature on them was to reproduce the same kind of formula, if you will, or look to the same fundamental key success points and replicate them. So one is fantastic terroir. And I mean that, from the classic, if you will, New World sense. So wonderful vineyards, producing wine from those vineyards, doing so with an eye on sustainability and producing wines that had very high integrity. So, that can age, that wines that, were very healthy and very clean. And so they replicated that in the year 2000 with Poggio Tesoro in Bulgari, and then in 2007 in Montalcino with an estate called San Polo. And really, that was Marilisa Allegrini. Marilisa Allegrini, like I said, is the entrepreneurial energy behind the estate, and she's the one who really wanted to continue to grow for, successive generations, her daughters, namely Carlotta and Caterina, and for generations beyond that, because when you invest in that, when you're a farmer, first and foremost, you really have to be generational in terms of your approach and amortizing vineyards and making things make sense.
What does the name Allegrini on a label mean to consumers in America?
Yeah, Allegrini, what I would like it to mean to consumers is an estate that is a legacy. So it's a family. It's one of the most highly accoladed in the entire country. The most Trebi carries for any Amarone, and Franco was the most highly awarded producer of Amarone in the country. So I hope there's a quality um, understanding that comes with that legacy. So not only is it family, it's quality, but it's also estate produced, and these are people who really care deeply about the land and the condition which they're leaving it in for the next generation. And if there was a final thing I would say about Allegrini, I love the name. I think it's a great name for a producer because Allegro, of course, means joyous or happy, and Allegrini means little happy people, which I think is a wonderful image to have in one's head when drinking copious amounts of Italian wine. And they're really they're wonderful people, and that's why it's been so important for me to kind of work with this family for so long. And they have a real spirit of hospitality. And you've been to the estate, and anybody who's ever has can talk about Marilisa, giving one a tour when she's 8 months pregnant at 10 o'clock at night, or cooking, pasta l'aglio l'olio at 2 a.m. for some guests because they're hungry. Or even her father used to, he was called the barrel spider because at any time of day and night, people would show up at the estate and he'd crawl up on those huge, big Slavonian casks and start pulling out wine for people to taste. I really do think that they bring a lot of joy, and that's one of the things that I just think is so wonderfully Italian, I guess.
Yeah, I can attest to that. I remember once being at Allegrini Estate, which is a former Roman domus, which was like, how cool is that? And the last thing I remember was singing YMCA with a Chinese contingent. It was a great party.
You're referring to Marilisa's party at Vinitaly, which is at Villa de la Torre. It's a 15th century estate. It's a jewel of the Italian Renaissance, an incredible piece of architecture, but it's really how the Allegrini family make it allegre that brings life to the villa. And like you say, she's done everything from, flash mobs of the lyric sopranos from the arena of Verona, the Verona Opera Company, to karaoke, to Japanese monks playing drums in this incredible estate. And this party that she does is really her thank you to the wine world. Every year she does it at Vinitaly, and the Vinitaly is for Italy, where the entire world shows up. And she's just such a fantastic representative, I think, of what it is, to be kind of Italian in the wine industry. And it's one of the things that's really carried Marilisa is that energy, that enthusiasm, that openness.
So am I incorrect in saying it was an old Roman domus, an original Roman house?
It's designed to look like one. And so it was built in the 15th century, and it does. I mean, the inner courtyard where we were singing karaoke, that at the end of the day is a replica. It actually looks a lot like Attia's house in Rome. If you remember the HBO series, it's built with very kind of neoclassical design, and the inspiration was entirely the Roman domus, but it was 15th century.
Okay, so we've got that corrected, and now I'm disappointed, but 400 years is pretty good, or 500 years. Let's talk a little bit about home, which is Valpolicella, and the 13 families of Amarone. Can you tell me about that and what Allegrini's role is?
So Marilisa was the first president of the Amarone families, which I think today is called Le Famiglie Storiche, so the historical families. And it was this idea of kind of protecting the appellation and trying to elevate quality. And that was something, Franco was actually the vice president of the consortium of Valpolicella, which is, the one legal body which regulates the rules for the DOC. And he resigned that post because he kind of was in protest. And he later, we declassified many of our single vineyards out of the appellation because of some technicalities that Franco felt very, very strongly about in terms of pushing quality forward. And really, fast forward almost 30 years, the Amarone families was born, or the Famiglie Storiche were born in order to kind of continue that legacy. So the idea that there would be Amarone would be a style of wine which represented the best of an artisan producer's kind of stock and not something that would be, pushed out into supermarkets at a very low cost, because like anything, when you dry grapes for 90 days, there's an artisan process. And I like to think of it almost like making a prosciutto or a parmigiano, right? We all know that craft makes Parmesan. And if you've ever tried a 24-month, aged Parmigiano Reggiano, you know that those two products have very little to do with one another.
Right.
There is bologna and then there's mortadella, right? Like these are things that don't have a lot to do with one another at the end of the day. And that's really what Amarone's trajectory can be and is, which is there is an industrially produced kind of sweet, cheap version. And then there is a craftsman's, artisan's version. And that's what the Amarone families were really about. The Famiglia Storica were really about trying to focus and protect and make sure that there was a clear definition of really what Amarone can be.
Well, let's change the conversation and focus a little bit about on-premise and retail. You're talking about these wines, and I'm not just talking about the Amarone, but pretty much the entire estate-produced line are not necessarily what people in Europe would call supermarket wines, but it's a very different marketplace that you guys are in and developing than what a new to the U.S. brand of an estate-produced wine is. Can you talk about the U.S. market and what are some of the hallmarks of it that new to the U.S. brand might be discovering that the people in the Allegrini company know by experience?
Yeah, and I'll preface this, Stephen. Like I said, I had some wonderful. I made a quip at the beginning of the interview. I said I had wonderful mentors from a humanistic standpoint, perhaps not so much from the professional. And I would like to correct that statement. I've worked with great professionals. Maria-Lisa Allegrini is one of them, but I'm just not a very high caliber professional, I feel. So I've fallen in love with the culture around Italian wine and the culture of this family. And so that's why I continue to carry the same title that I have for the last 15 years. It's because I love what I do. And I think there's a story to be told. Over that time, Allegrini brand has grown quite a bit. And so we do have a retail portion of our business, which, we've been recognized with one of our wines 6 times in the top 100 wines of the year from Spectator. That's something that's never really happened at a wine that's $25 on the shelf from any country. And so there is a retail portion to our business now. What could I say is, for me and for the brand overall, I feel like our strength as Italian producers are our Italian restaurateurs. And I really feel like it's what energizes and what makes Italian wine timeless at the end of the day is it's very, very close link to cuisine. And when you're linking wine to cuisine in Italy, you're linking a tradition to history. And ultimately, those are the things that lead to a rich life, I feel. It's a culture of the table. It's about bringing people together. And when you add all of these elements together, it's not like I figured this out. This was known 3,000 years ago that by Socrates, before pronouncing upon anything, you had to take a big slug of wine and then pass it to your neighbor, and then you could speak. And so there's something about this culture of the table, which I think leads to a rich life, or it has for me. And so that's where I'm focused on. And we started working with the Gallo family and with San Pablo, the Trinchero family. These are the 2 largest, wineries in the world. And one of the things that really attracted us to them was their agricultural roots. So the fact that they are generationally planning as well for their companies. And that's really important because, like I say, that's how we view things. And the other thing is that they've started these divisions. One is called Maze Row or Lux Wines. And it's really focused on taking care of the on-premise. And so allowing people to trial and allowing our wines to be part of that experience, which is really around the table. And Trinchero is doing the same. They have something called the Heritage Wine Division, and there are people that are totally on board with this thesis that wine and food and history are all so closely interlinked, and ultimately, can lead to a very enriching existence. And that's why we're working with the importers that we do, because they have the same agricultural background, and now they have these divisions which are really focused on where I want to be focusing our business, which is the on-premise.
Italian Wine Podcast. If you think you love wine as much as we do, then give us a like and a follow anywhere you get your pods.
Excellent. I one of the lines I came up with was thinking about Italian politics, and in Italy, nothing works, but everything works out. And that's kind of been my experience whenever I'm in Italy. Maybe the restaurant you want to go to isn't open, but the one next door turns out to be fabulous, and some very interesting people come by, and you end up having the most wonderful time. I also think it's the reason, and I do believe this is true, that gelato tastes better in Italy, just like bagels taste better in New York. There's something about it, whether it's the water or the ambiance or some metaphysical thing. I don't know. But at the end of the day, yeah, it's la dolce vita, right? I mean,
and when you cannot understand Lambrusco unless you've had it with mortadella and gnocco fritto and some parmigiano. Like, the wine's reason for being, it doesn't really make a ton of sense unless you put it within that context. And so that's what happens so frequently when you're in Italy, is that local wine, local foods, millennia of kind of tradition, it comes together in such an incredible way. So the more that we can be replicating those experiences, the more that we can share those experiences with people, like kids from the Napa Valley, the more likely that they'll end up working in Italian wine the rest of their life.
Okay, so we've been talking about Allegrini, and obviously that's important for both of us for a variety of reasons. But let's turn it over a little bit to Robin Shay. You're the export manager. What's your mission and goals and motivation? Given the podium that Allegrini has in the wine world, both in Italy and here in the U.S., what are your goals for the brand and goals for yourself? The way I phrase it sometimes is, what do you want to be when you grow up?
Yeah, it's a tough, I guess in that regard, I've never grown up. And another way of looking at it, I grew up 15 years ago and haven't progressed since. So I
don't look at it that way. I don't like that one at all.
I'm an export manager, and like I say, that's sometimes a very lofty title for me, because I really follow this coal inside of me, right? It's the idea that I think that there is something that I discovered in Italy, and I love sharing that with people. And the Allegrini family represents a lot of those values, and I continue to have that be central to, when I talk about the wines, I'm sharing my experience of the wines, but also my experience of the culture, and how to apply that, sometimes in a business context and sometimes on a personal context. What would my goal for the brand be? My goal for the brand is to continue to place these wines in the context which I feel in which they excel. So around the table with excellent food, and food which is thoughtfully been sourced, produced, much as our wines are thoughtfully sourced and produced. And in Italy, they say, when you're pairing something, il buono sta bene con il buono. And that means what's good is good with what's good, which sounds really stupid, but is when you're talking about sourcing and care and artisanship, I feel like they do make sense. I mean, I just paired like I was saying before this interview, I was in Mexico, and I paired Palazzo del Torre, which is our Ripasso style wine, with a mole, made an octopus mole in Los Cabos, and it blew my mind. But the chef is like one of the best chefs in this guy Enrique Olvera. He's one of the greatest chefs in Mexico, and that pairing blew my mind. And so I really think there is something to be said for me, finding those moments of marriage of quality, and then letting the magic happen.
Interesting. I asked this question of people not on the podcast, but just in personal conversation. What was the moment this wine thing kind of came over you? And in my case, it was came home from New York one night. I was tired. It was a hot day. My wife had made lamb chops, and I opened a bottle. Happened to have a bottle of Burgundy. Won't go into the detail of what, but it was magic. And it was like, okay, everybody stop talking. I want to enjoy this experience. What was your moment when you realized that wine was going to be your future?
Oh, man.
Obviously, you're closer to it having been in Napa. We don't.
Yeah, see, that's the thing. I kind of grew up with it around, but I do remember my mom took me to Smith & Wollensky in New York when I was 14 years old. And she ordered the Matanzas Creek Chard. I remember it. And I got to have a glass, and they were so cool about us. 14 years old, I got to have a glass with, at Smith & Wollensky. And it was the first time, the oak in the wine. And it was a long time ago, Stephen, so it's 30 years ago. And I remember being like, whoa, this is really excellent. And, you got butter and the lobster on the table. Like, hell yeah, that's the sauce right there. The wine sang. And I remember and I had grown up in California, and of course being exposed to quality, but it was that food and wine. It was that moment that brought me together. And then I really got involved in production. I made wine for a number of years, and I was really not very good at that. And I remember Franco Allegrini said to me, Robin, your English is better than your winemaking, so you should consider a career in the export department.
That's great.
And so he said, you go work for my sister. So yeah. But I've had just so many magical experiences in Italy, pairing food and wine and understanding that there absolutely is an appropriate moment for, a Lambrusco. And it's the only wine that you'd ever want to drink at that particular point in time. There's some great examples of people who have done really cool stuff with Lambrusco. And, I looked at the work that Oscar Farinetti's doing at Italy, even, the Bastianich and Batali in their day. And there are so many other restaurateurs that I've met that have, taken a Lambrusco and just kind of shaken it up, right? And kind of push it every once in a while and do so in context. And in the end, I don't know if it's revitalized the category or of Lambruscos, but for me, when I have a mortadella and a gnocco fritto and Parmigiano, like it's the only wine. You could be offering me Cru Barolo. No, I want a Lambrusco.
All right. Well, now I got that in my mind. That's what I'm going to work with. But that raises an issue. I'm an old guy, baby boomer. There's this legacy of bad wines, of Bola, Suave, and sweet, fizzy, sweet Lambrusco that wasn't even Lambrusco. And everybody talks about, well, those categories have been poisoned or damaged from all that. Why do those things have any salience in today's world, which is like 2 to 3 generations distant from that in the 1970s?
Oh, you make a great point. It's one that I hear all the time when I hear people saying, it's not the Suave it used to be. And like you say, that statement doesn't make sense for, the grand majority of the wine consuming market, right? They have no reference of what Suave used to be, or Chianti when it was sold in the Fiasco, there's no reference point. But
right.
Why I think it's so important to remember, and to talk about that is that, like you say, washed out, sweet, fizzy, like all of these things come to an end. And it's because they're fundamental shortcuts, they're things which aren't good for you as a person, as a human, too much sugar, and they're things which have been produced in a way that has left some of the artisanship and some of that magic in the process, which is Italian. And so the same way that bologna forgot about what mortadella was, or, cooked hen has nothing, it's not prosciutto cotto, it's just different. And that's why driving back to really quality product, artisan product, and finding those partners for our wines out there in the market is my mission.
Cool. Okay. I like to end my interviews with a question. Out of all of the things that we just talked about, what's the big takeaway for listeners? And recognize that most of the people who do listen are from the trade. What's the one practical thing they heard that they can put to use immediately of what we discussed?
It's a lofty statement for me to kind of prognosticate about what people are going. I can tell you what I try to do, which is I try to really continue to bring what excites and energizes me. And some people always say it's the story that sells the wine. And I think that the story is important. But what's super important to me, since I came from a production background and making wine, and I've had this epiphany with Italian culture and food, is that you can actually, as they say, constatare, you can prove, verify it is the word. You can verify the story when you put it together with artisan product that's local in its specialization, like our wines are. And so, when you put an Amarone with a Parmigiano Reggiano, when you put a Sangiovese from Montalcino, from our San Polo, if you put the Rosso di Montalcino with a Ragu di Coniglio, it's like, blows your mind, the super Tuscans with steak, classic porterhouse.
That was rabbit sauce, right?
Yeah, rabbit sauce. Yeah. I know. When you say rabbit sauce, some people
it
get.
Doesn't sound the same.
It doesn't sound nice. It doesn't sound like I'm a nice person.
It's one of my favorite dishes at Eat Truly on 26th Street in New York, and I didn't know it was rabbit.
Yeah. Well, there you go. In Italy, they have to leave the head on the rabbit still in order when you purchase it, so that you can actually see that it has the two incisors, the front teeth, because a rabbit looks very similar to a cat. And that's a hangover from World War II, so that cats couldn't be sold as rabbits in the butcher.
Oh, my God. I wish you hadn't have shared that with me.
So when you buy a rabbit in Italy, the head has to still be on. And I won't get even to what the people of Vicenza are famous for. But, it's part of that food and wine culture that just, I love it. And so stay close to what energizes you. And maybe it is the oak in the wine, far be it from me to say. But if you're selling Italian wine, a good healthy dose of Italian culinary culture and food culture and history and art. I mean, that's the stuff. That's the interesting stories, in my opinion. And unfortunately, I don't watch soccer, and it's one of the things that really lacks in my sales pitches. I have no idea what Milan or Juventus did last week, but I get by because I'm really enthusiastic about, and I'm really interested in about what our partners are doing out there.
Wow. So if people want to reach out to you, where can they find more information on Allegrini? And if they wanted to connect with Robin Shay, how would they reach you?
So Allegrini is, of course, our website, www.allegrini.it. For the hospitality, if you ever want to visit that incredible Villa della Torre, that 15th century villa we were talking about, there are 11 rooms. It's a B&B. And that is www.villadellatorre.it. And you can go directly to the website there. San Polo is a beautiful estate in Montalcino. We also have hospitality facilities there. And that's poggiosanpolo.com. And in Bulgari, Poggio al Tesoro, which is the estate Maria-Lisa founded with her daughters in Bulgari and her eldest brother, Walter. That's www.poggioaltesoro.it. Poggio is Poggio, Poggio al Tesoro. And she's just completing the hospitality facility there. Major benefit in Bulgari is there's a fantastic pool at that estate. And there's kind of a dunking pool in Montalcino as well. But when the Bulgari guest house gets finished, kind of like our wines, these aren't hotels, right? These are little B&Bs. Maybe that's even a stretch. They're just guest houses. It's anywhere from 5 to 11 rooms for you to come and stay. We can book them out to you. You'll be given a key, almost Airbnb style. But man, when you dig into these local little jewels, the food of Montalcino, the incredible shellfish and seafare of Bulgari with those super Tuscan wines, and then, the cheeses and the mountain fare, and of course, La Arena di Verona, right? Come in the summer and go and see an opera season in downtown Verona.
Yeah, that's one thing that's on my bucket list. I've been to the arena and been to a couple of parties in the arena, but I haven't seen an opera there yet. Seem to always come in the fall, not in the summer.
Well, Maria-Lisa, she sits on the board of the arena. She sits on the board of a number of trade associations. and kind of she was just nominated as a Cavaliere di Lavoro. So she was just basically knighted by the president of the Italian Republic because she is this incredible ambassador to all that is Italian, and it's why I love her for it, and we'll continue to kind of be her prophet as long as she'll have me, and come and stay at our estates or come hook up with us sometime, and live it how the Allegrini show it. And I think it's a great way to get to know the country.
I love it. So we're speaking this week with Robin Shay, the export manager or director of Allegrini. And it was a very interesting conversation. I want to thank you for your time. It's always fun talking with you, Robin. And for our listeners, tune in next week and we'll have another interesting guest on Get U.S. Market Ready with Italian Wine People. And thank you again, Robin.
Thank you, Stephen. Always great to chat.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode brought to you by the Wine to Wine Business Forum 2022. This year will mark the 9th edition of the forum, to be held on November 7th and 8th, 2022 in Verona, Italy. Remember, tickets are on sale now, so for more information, please visit us at winetowine.net. Hi guys, I'm Joy Livingston and I am the producer of the Italian Wine Podcast. Thank you for listening. We are the only wine podcast that has been doing a daily show since the pandemic began. This is a labor of love and we are committed to bringing you free content every day. Of course, this takes time and effort, not to mention the cost of equipment, production, and editing. We would be grateful for your donations, suggestions, requests, and ideas. For more information on how to get in touch, go to ItalianWinePodcast.com.